You're listening to the AAF Analyzed podcast with your hosts, Derek Heid and Garrett Lay.
Hello and welcome to AAF Analyzed Week 4 Recap. As always, I am Derek Heid, and alongside me, Garrett Lay. Before we get started, do not forget, if you are listening on YouTube, to like and subscribe. If you're on Soundcloud, to like and give us a follow, and subscribe and leave us a review on some of our Apple podcasts as well. Follow us on Twitter at AAF Analyzed to keep up with the latest news and episode release announcements. We might be releasing some pretty exciting stuff real soon, so I highly recommend giving us a follow.
Absolutely. Follow us on Twitter. We reiterate it every week because it's very important. We like to see that Twitter audience grow. Before we start here, you might notice we might sound a little different. That's because Derek is recording in his room on spring break. And I am also in my room because the sound booth I'm normally in is being renovated. So excuse any maybe outside noise. We apologize. We'll be back to normal in a couple days. Next episode, I'll be in the sound booth, so we should be all good. But once again, if there's any background noise or anything else, we apologize, and that won't happen very often. Now we can get
quick renovations.
Yeah, they are. It's only like an hour and a half. They're redoing the sound paneling, I think. Anyway, now on to the important and meaty part of the podcast. First, we have what is becoming my most favorite part, and that is the game picking. So, Derek, would you like to go ahead and say how we did this week?
How is that your favorite part?
Because
I'm still up on you by 3 games.
Yeah, but I did well this week. Well-ish. So, go ahead, Derek. Share our scores for the week.
Okay, well, this week you went a really great 2-2. Congrats on that. And I really underperformed this week, and I went to 1-3. And before that, my worst week was 3-1. Really sad. However, I'm still 12-4 on the season. Garrett moves up to 9-7. So I still have a 3-game lead, despite Garrett's now loving the game pick somehow. So still 3 games up on him, and I'm still feeling confident going into next week.
Well, this was a really fun week of AAF football, I got to say. 3 upsets and close games. I was able to gain a game with those upsets, but like you said, I'm still 3 back. And without further ado, let's get into those games that included those 3 upsets. So, for the first upset of the weekend, we had the San Diego Fleet playing at the Memphis Express, and miraculously, the Memphis Express took the game 26-23. Derek, who got this one right? It was me. Was it under questionable circumstances because the Fleet looked excellent until their starting quarterback went down? Yes. Do I care? Sort of, but not really, because it feels good to be right. Other than that, though, we were right about almost nothing in this game, but that's what I think made it the most fun. So, San Diego began the game just as you would want to start a game of football. They forced a 3-and-out that included a sack, and then scored the first punt return touchdown in AAF history to take an early 6-0 lead. The Memphis offense stalled on their second drive, but the Express caught a nice break when Donnie Hagman missed his first field goal of the season and shanked a 52-yard attempt. Memphis was able to get the ball moving a little bit, and thanks to the field position provided by the missed field goal, they sunk a 46-yard field goal of their own thanks to the new leg of Austin McGinnis. The Fleet were unfazed, though, and thanks to a sweet 54-yard catch and run by the receiver Dantes Ford, and then a nice 6-yard touchdown catch by Ford as well, the Fleet were able to take a 14-3 lead and end the first quarter after a successful 2-point conversion. Memphis started the second quarter hot on defense, getting a sack fumble and turning that into a 40-yard field goal to make it 14-6. The Fleet once again looked unshaken, though, and were having a dominant offensive drive. Unfortunately, on a 4th-and-1 conversion, Philip Nelson was hit after a throw, and he went down with a collarbone injury, and Alex Ross had to step in. Fortunately, on the other side, Ross's second throw was a beautiful 30-yard touchdown, and the Fleet looked to be in good hands with a score of 20-6. The Express kept themselves in the game with another McGinnis field goal on their next possession, making it to 22-9. And to further keep themselves in it, linebacker Drew Jackson picked off Alex Ross, and they turned that turnover into a TD, with Mettenberger sneaking it in from 1 yard out, making it 20-15 to end the half. A very exciting first half of football in Memphis. The third quarter was a defensive battle, with previously explosive Fleet offense being put in check, and a Memphis offense that was getting the job done to keep it close going nowhere. Finally, at the beginning of the fourth quarter, the Fleet broke through and kicked a 46-yard field goal to make it 23-15. Memphis did what they had to do, forcing a 3-and-out, and then had a huge sack fumble. The Memphis offense did something they had struggled to do all season, that was throw the ball down the field, and after a 15-yard completion by Mettenberger, they would have put 8 more points on the board. After a 6-yard touchdown pass from Mettenberger, it was a great throw, and a completed 2-point conversion to tie it up at 23. Memphis defense made a critical stop, and the hero of the day, Austin McGinnis, made a 46-yard field goal to give Memphis the lead, and this Memphis team showed one more time that they didn't crack under pressure and forced their 3rd sack fumble of the game to ice it and get their first win of the season. This was an excellent game of football, and I enjoyed watching every second of it.
Austin McGinnis, what a game by him.
Absolutely.
First game in an AAF uniform, and he goes 4 of 4, even sinking one from 46 yards out. Just incredible.
I didn't think the
him.
Memphis kicker was even that bad, but whoever decided to drop him and pick up McGinnis is looking like a genius right now.
Yeah. Seriously.
Really. So on to the stories for this game. The first one that I have here is Zach Mettenberger good enough? He did lead them to win their first game of the season, where they had a lackluster run game, to say the least, which that was something we definitely got wrong this game. The run games were just not there. If you watch the game, there were some wide open deep routes that he wasn't able to hit, underthrowing his receivers, which he did hit last week when he had a really, really good game after Hackenberg was pulled. And he had great protection too, so he should be able to make those throws, step up into the ball to get it down the field. The offensive line only allowed 1 sack and 5 quarterback hits. He did, of course, keep them in the game, though. He didn't throw any picks, and he made an excellent throw, like I said, on that game-tying TD to Terrence McGee, as well as running in a touchdown and a 2-point conversion. So I can definitely see him improving and making his half of the Zach attack great.
Let's be honest. Does it really matter if he's good enough? Because, quite frankly, he's the best thing that Memphis has.
That's true.
And the only question I have regarding Mettenberger is, why didn't they go to him sooner? This game, he had 72% completion, 174 yards, and a touchdown. That's enough to make me a believer, because Christian Hackenberg wasn't putting anything close to that through 3 weeks of football.
No, and I think that completion percentage number is huge, as well as the fact he threw no picks. He was getting his receivers the ball and the chance to make plays in the open field. So I think that'll really come to shine next week. He's going to be the starter next week after getting them a win. So once he establishes those connections with the receivers, I think he's going to get a lot more yards than 174. Second story of the game here is that really unfortunate Philip Nelson injury. It's already confirmed that Nelson will be missing at least next week with a collarbone injury, and it seems like Ross will be the starter going into next week. It's an unfortunate speed bump for a Fleet offense whose play had finally begun to match the play of that excellent defense.
Yeah, we had the Fleet super high in our power rankings because we thought there was nowhere to go but up, and quite frankly, Philip Nelson was a main reason for that, and this injury is going to hurt them hard. Yeah. It's sad because I also had just picked up Nelson to be my starting quarterback in fantasy. It's very upsetting on my part. But in all honesty, though, I really don't have much of a problem with Ross in as the backup quarterback. No, he isn't as good as Philip Nelson, but he has been putting up good enough numbers to warrant some playing time. In the preseason, I thought he was the best quarterback on the Fleet's roster. He went 11 of 14 for 112 yards and 2 touchdowns then. In Week 4, he still put up a fairly respectable 8 of 18 for 80 yards and a touchdown. He's still better than Berkovici, and quite frankly, I'm all right with him starting for a week or two while Philip Nelson is okay again, because the West is anyone's game still.
Yeah, this is just going to be another opportunity for a quarterback to get into the Fleet system and settle down. We saw it with Philip Nelson. When he first stepped in, he wasn't that great, but then he really started to make some great throws. And I think that 30-yard touchdown pass that Alex Ross had is an indication of what he can do and where he can put the ball. So it'll be interesting to see what he can do with now his shot to start.
But the West again, the first-place team is a 3-way tie between 3, 2, and 2 teams.
Yeah.
So it's anyone's race, and quite frankly, leaving out Nelson for a week could be detrimental, but it could also not mean much in the grand scheme of things.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of the other part of the offenses, I want to talk about the stagnant run games. Both you and I thought this game was going to be brimming with big runs, and there were almost none. Memphis rushed for only 57 yards, with Stacy gaining 39 of those at only 2.2 yards per carry. The Fleet did rush for over 100, but their quarterback Alex Ross accounted for 33 of those, and one part of their dynamic duo and my power player of the week, Jaquan Gardner, had 9 carries for a meager 6 yards. It was just, the running game was not there. We thought it was going to be. Neither team could get anything going. Now, I would like to say that they might have to change up some play calling on the offensive side of the ball, but it also attests to how good both of these defenses are at stopping the run. San Diego already had a top 3 run defense in the league, so the tough running for Memphis is not as much of a surprise as it was for the Fleet, as the Express were the second worst team in yards allowed to running backs. If this game has proved anything, it's that they can penetrate that backfield and came away with a total of 7 tackles for losses this game. So it looks like they really maybe got that run defense under control and can make some big plays in the backfield.
I think we always thought that Memphis had a really good defense, but it wasn't until Zach Mettenberger stepped in that they actually had an offense that could do something.
I totally agree there.
So that's kind of what put them over the top and won this game. But quite frankly, Memphis was really lucky to win this game. Not only was San Diego up by 14 and blew it after the injury, but look at the box score. Memphis had 6 less first downs than San Diego. Their third down efficiency was 3 of 15 as compared to San Diego's 6 of 15. They ran 6 less plays. They had less total yards and less yards per play. I don't understand how they won this game.
I would have to give it to the foot of Austin McGinnis, and that's literally it. That has to be how they won.
Incredible. San Diego shot themselves in the foot.
Yeah.
San Diego lost this game by 3 points, and counted up, they turned the ball over 4 times. Every turnover, except for the one that ended the game, turned into points for Memphis, and they gave up in the ball in their own half every single time. Memphis had 17 of their 26 points off of turnovers, 2 of which were touchdowns. That's just unacceptable.
Yeah. People are probably getting super annoyed with me saying it because I say it every single week about literally every single game. But the team that wins the turnover battle really tends to win these games. And it's pretty obvious in this one. If Memphis doesn't force those turnovers with those huge sack fumbles, there's no way they win this game at all.
No.
But speaking of the leg of Austin McGinnis, he is my game MVP. Brand new kicker, cold leg, walks in, goes 4 for 4 on field goals, as well as draining the game winner from 45 yards out. You can't ask for anything more from a special teams player, and if he's not the AAF Special Teams Player of the Week, I will be very, very surprised.
That's true.
Now, I would like to give out a defensive MVP, though, because Memphis had another player who played absolutely exceptionally, and that is linebacker Drew Jackson. He tore it up. He had 14 tackles, 4 tackles for loss, 4 pass defense, 1 sack, and a pick. So I wouldn't also be surprised if he's the defensive player of the week, and Memphis kind of runs it on players of the week.
Yeah. Personally, my game MVP is whoever greased the footballs for San Diego, because no one could keep a hold of those. But in all seriousness, Zach Mettenberger, Met finally proved that there's a competent quarterback at the Express facility, and the future looks bright with him because that Express defense is very good, as we keep saying, and with a competent quarterback under the helm, they could challenge just about any team in this league with that defense and offense combo.
Yeah, I agree. I think it was really exciting to see Memphis win. I know you were a little upset because you didn't pick them, and I was a little more excited because I did. But just to see an 0-3 team get a win, I saw some videos of the players reacting afterwards, and I think it does great things for the league and the players' willingness to put forward their best effort just to get that win. It was really awesome.
And as we move on from a nice game in Memphis, we're going over to the worst weather game of the bunch, the Orlando Apollos taking on the Salt Lake Stallions in Salt Lake. My weather prediction did in fact make an appearance, despite my lack of confidence in Mother Nature actually making an appearance at the game, and she left the stadium with a very lackluster attendance number and a very, very sloppy field. But hey, at least no one could say something about the field art because you couldn't see it at the stadium. And when the snow comes out, the run game is paramount. And we had both predicted that the teams had formidable running attacks, and they did. So there was one last thing that would separate these teams, and that would have to be the big play. But the amount of running plays led to very long drives. 2 drives in the first quarter took up 80% of the quarter, and the Stallions ended theirs with a failed 4th down conversion, and Orlando finished theirs with only a field goal. So only a 3-0 game, kind of boring. The second quarter was just more of the same, long drives ending an additional 3 points for both teams, making the halftime score a very exciting 6-3 in favor of Orlando. The second game is where the excitement happened, though. Orlando started to dig into the playbook, and they found a passing game so that Garrett Gilbert could extend his passing touchdown streak to another game and extend their lead 14-3. However, Salt Lake would immediately follow this with a Joel Buonio touchdown of their own, making the score formidable 14-11, but Orlando had enough of them hanging around as they do so often, and Akeem Hunt extended the lead to 2 scores again, 30 seconds into the fourth quarter. Salt Lake was never able to get the ball of their own half after that as they dropped their 3rd game of the season, 20-11. Key players of the game, Garrett Gilbert, 22 of 32, 244 yards and a touchdown. Not even snow can stop this guy. Charles Johnson, his top receiver, 9 receptions for 105 yards in the snow. Just an incredible game. And one of their defensive players, Andrew Ankra, had 2 sacks in the game. And for the Stallions, Josh Woodrum still put up a pretty respectable 16-22 for 161 yards. And Brandon Oliver, 17 carries for 71 yards. So he also had a very good game. As we go on to look into the stories, the weather finally made an appearance. If you got a chance to watch the game, you could have seen the snowy mess that was Rice-Eccles Stadium. And this led to a ton of running plays, but not too much else. However, you would have think that snow would make a bigger effect in the game, because neither team turned over the ball once. There were 0 turnovers in this game.
Yeah.
And both QBs had a completion percentage over 68%, which is incredibly impressive at a sunny day, let alone a snowy and messy game. And all 3 field goal attempts in the game went right down the middle.
Yeah, so we did have a question on Twitter about whether or not we thought this weather would maybe influence the AAF's decision to expand to northern teams, and I think this number shows that the weather might not play as big of a factor as we think. It did force some running games, but the quarterback still played very well, and I think with more northern teams and teams from the south having to play in the north more often, they'll get used to it. It might hurt attendance at the games a little bit, but it's not going to change viewership on the TV. So I do think they're still going to be perfectly fine with moving those teams up north. Plus, I think the north, of course, has a huge market for any sort of football team at all. So I don't think this weather is going to be a real turnoff for the AAF, and I wouldn't be surprised if most of these expansion teams will be in the north next season.
They were talking about the AAF. The main thing that they're looking out for is how well the players in the field do. And if they all seem to play well in the snow, even though it looks fairly bad, they're not going to really shy away from these cold weather places.
Yeah, plus people on TV love to watch snow games too. They're always super exciting just to see guys trying to truck through inches of snow. So I think they're perfectly fine. I think it adds another football element to the game. You got to play football no matter the conditions. So yeah.
And with that snow, big plays were key. Much like I had predicted, the big play was the key to victory in this game. Both teams had a successful run game, but the big distinguisher was the big plays, which Orlando had the edge in, just as I had predicted. Orlando had a 20-yard touchdown pass, and anytime Salt Lake threw quote-unquote deep, it fell incomplete. Orlando had a couple of runs over 15 yards, and Salt Lake had none, really just proving why Orlando ended up winning this game.
Yeah, this Orlando team is so lethally balanced here. Their defense does not give up big plays, and like you said, Josh Woodrum didn't have a bad game. He threw over 60% completion percentage, but
over
68% completion percentage. But the problem is he didn't have many yards, and it's because this Orlando secondary is excellent. Those receivers just couldn't get open and make those big plays like you were saying. It might help a little bit if they could catch but, still, the coverage of the Apollos is just too good. Their run defense is also excellent. And right now, they're clearly the best team in the AAF. They have a lethal offense and a stout defense.
They have to be, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Now, continuing the thoughts on the Apollos offense, what can stop Garrett Gilbert?
Nothing.
Not even 3 inches of snow on the field can stop Gilbert from producing. He now has 4 straight weeks that he's thrown for at least 200 yards and a touchdown, which has proved to be fairly difficult across the league. So power rankings for the team, the Apollos number 1. Power rankings for quarterback, Gilbert is far and away number 1 there too. There's nothing that can stop him.
Those would be impressive numbers for a quarterback in the NFL right now. So he's playing the best ball of his life. Like I thought, there weren't really any Stallions cornerbacks who could keep up, who could guard his speedy receivers or his big receivers like Charles Johnson, who we're going to talk about in a second. So he was still able to tear up a really, really good Stallions defense.
Yet Charles Johnson had a fantastic game. Mentioned it early. He had 9 receptions for 105 yards, which is very, very nice. And he was the exact thing that the Apollos needed to win this game. He would take short passes for a longer gain than the first down marker, giving just enough of a threat to pass that the rushing lanes continued to be open despite the incredibly snowy weather. 9 receptions is also incredible, and he's averaging over 100 yards per game. And this game just put him 115 yards ahead of Rashad Ross for most receiving yards in the league. A very, very respectable sum of 405 yards, I believe.
Yeah, he's one of the strongest receivers in the league. I think him and Rashad Ross are probably in the discussion for the top receiver in the league. And both of them, when you see them play, right now, there just aren't many cornerbacks who are able to keep up with these guys. They're too big, too fast, and the cornerbacks simply aren't disciplined enough to knock down passes without getting called for pass interference. So as long as Charles Johnson keeps playing like this, the Apollos are going to be just fine.
Yeah, I beg your pardon. Charles Johnson actually has 410 yards in the season, but that's still an incredible number by all means. And game MVP, you could say Garrett Gilbert here because he continued to keep the streak alive, but I have to give it to Charles Johnson. Even though Gilbert had a fantastic game, Johnson was the main reason that the passing game for the Apollos was a threat still through the snow. And without his massive production, I don't think that the running game would have opened as much as it had, thus making the Apollos offense as deadly as it was throughout this entire game.
Yeah, I totally agree. I do give my game MVP to Garrett Gilbert, though, just because he's the leader of this offense. He's the guy making the throws, but of course, it's perfectly fine to acknowledge the guy who makes the play with the ball after he gets the throw. But yeah, Garrett Gilbert, he's just been so consistent. And right now, he's been pretty much the MVP of the Apollos week in and week out.
Possibly the MVP of the league
right now,
too.
I would say so.
Hopefully he can keep that kind of production up.
I see it happening, yeah.
And as we move out from the snow, we move to Sunday for the San Antonio Commanders versus the Birmingham Iron game in Birmingham. This was kind of a snoozer, but if you like defensive football, it certainly was your kind of day.
Oh, yeah.
Another game where weather issues were apparent, though. Not nearly to the same extent as Orlando versus Salt Lake, but it's definitely still a factor. It was a pretty rainy day in Birmingham for this game, leading to a low-scoring affair between the Iron and the Commanders. In 2 words, this game was a defensive battle. Neither team wanted to give up an inch in this game, and the rain only made the drives longer and more time-consuming. Again, going along with the theme of a slow first half, neither team was able to finish any of their long drives at the touchdown, ending almost all of them in punts, and each team was able to come away with some points, though, as both were able to convert 1 field goal each to go into half tied at a very, very exciting 3-3 score. But however, behind an incredible offensive performance from Kenneth Farrow, he had 30 carries for 142 yards. The Commanders were able to end a drive with a Trey Williams touchdown, and if you go back to episode 9, one of my players to watch from this game was Trey Williams, as he's a pretty good player to watch out for.
Yeah, I do feel bad for Kenneth Farrow, though. He ran all those yards, and the touchdown ended up being a 5-yard carry by Trey Williams. But whoever gets the job done gets the job done. Kenneth Farrow was excellent with by far the most yards in a game by a running back in the AAF so far, so he has good things coming for him.
But if you're a fantasy owner, 14 points is still very nice.
Absolutely.
Add another field goal onto this in the fourth quarter, and the Commanders had a pretty good lead, going in at 12-3. And at the same time that the Commanders' offense was getting in a groove and they were starting to do good things, the Iron offense collapsed. They turned the ball over an outstanding 4 times in the second half, 2 interceptions and 2 fumbles. One such play was a fumble by Luis Perez that was picked up by Brandon Ross and then fumbled by Ross, picked up by the other team. Not your best offensive play. They're probably going to toss that one out.
Yeah.
And the Iron offense was a mess this entire game, and that didn't end until their final drive of the game, with what else than a Trent Richardson touchdown, his 7th on the year. And all this did was make the score a more respectable 12-11, but don't be fooled, their offense was far from outstanding, unlike their defense. Key players from this game, Kenneth Farrow, I just got to say it again because it's that incredible, 30 carries for 142 yards. Quarterback for the Commanders, Logan Woodside, 11-25 for 106 yards. And for the Iron, Luis Perez has just gone downhill, 19-39 for 202 yards and 2 picks. Trent Richardson didn't even lead the team in carries this game, taken over by Ross, yet he still scored number 7, a very impressive total, say the least.
It was still a 1-yard touchdown run, which is pretty much what I feel is going to be Trent Richardson the entire year. Just slam the ball into the end zone with him from 5 yards or under, and it's probably going to be a touchdown. So at least the Iron offense has that going for them right now.
Yeah. As I talked about how the Iron offense collapsed, let's talk about that. The quarterback play was non-existent for either team, though. This game was led by the backs in every way. Neither Woodside or Perez had over a 50% completion percentage or a passing touchdown. And this just led to the importance of the run game, a battle that the Iron was crushed in 161 yards to a mere 85. It was kind of wet there, but the weather was far worse in Salt Lake, and both those quarterbacks did just fine.
Yeah, I think that does attest to how much better Woodrum and Garrett Gilbert are. It seems right now at this point in the season. We thought Perez was going to be one of the top quarterbacks in the AAF, but something's happening. And I don't know what it is, but it's not good for him. And Woodside really did not do much right except for not turning the ball over, which we'll talk about later is a huge key. The Iron defense forcing turnovers. So other than that, he also really didn't impress me, so it'll be interesting to see what they do at quarterback. They're probably going to keep him in because they did still, of course, win this game. He didn't throw any picks. He didn't do anything that really, really hurt the team. So he should still be the starter, but they need some better play out of Woodside to make the Commanders' offense pretty formidable again.
Yeah. Even despite this, though, they're still tied for the lead in the West, so I don't really understand why they'd want to change much, if anything. Because their defense is also playing very well.
Mm-hmm.
But the wait for Luis Perez's first touchdown, whether that be on the ground or through the air, continues. The clock continues to tick as we wait for Perez's first touchdown of the year, as another game finished without anything for Perez. And I did some research. 10 different players have thrown a touchdown pass before Luis Perez. And might I remind you, there's 8 teams in the league.
Yeah.
Which includes the obvious players like Garrett Gilbert and John Wolford, but then it also includes people like Matt Linehan, who played for about half a game for the Stallions, and Apollo's wide receiver Jalen Marshall, who has, I believe, 2 passing attempts in the year, and he has a passing touchdown.
He has 1 touchdown. Mm-hmm.
Yep, and if you look at another stat, Christian Hackenberg also has a rushing touchdown, but no passing touchdowns, but we will still count it. So 11 other QBs, yes, I'm considering Jalen Marshall a QB, has scored a touchdown before Luis Perez, and there are only 8 teams in the league. And keep in mind, according to CBS, Luis Perez had about 11 offers after week 1. So I wonder how many are still there.
Those offers are slowly slipping away. You could blame maybe a little bit on his wide receivers. None of his wide receivers played very well this week. But he needs to make better decisions decisions with the ball. If you watched any of the game, his 2 picks were not good throws at all. Of course, the one did come on a 4th and 12 when they were trying to go for the onside conversion here. But it was not a good play. It wasn't a good play call at all, so we could blame a little bit on that. But he just underthrew it into double coverage. It was the one receiver who was double covered he threw at. And his first pick of the game, once again, it was just directly at the cornerback who was lurking there waiting for a pick. He isn't making very good decisions, and I hate to bash him because I really liked him at the beginning of the year, but something needs to change, whether it's just better connections with the receivers, or I don't know if the Iron want to change quarterback right now. They are still 3-1, so I probably wouldn't until things start really going bad, or if Perez doesn't throw a touchdown. I don't know. I'd give him maybe the next 2 games because according to the stats, this was the ideal game for him to score. San Antonio had the worst secondary in the league up until this point, and he threw them 2 picks. So it'll be interesting to see what the Iron do at the quarterback position.
Just really doesn't make much sense for him. Speaking of also not making much sense, we're going to continue with the Iron offense. Is Trent Richardson losing the feature back job for the Iron? I don't know if I'm looking too deep into these numbers, but Richardson has progressively gotten less and less carries every week so far, and this week hit an alarmingly low point. This week, Brandon Ross had 1 more carry and a staggering 49 more yards, meaning a change could be coming. Carries in each game for Richardson started at 23, then went to 19, then 17, and this week he got just 8. It seems to make sense, though, because despite his impressive 7 touchdowns, he's only averaging 2.3 yards per rush on the season, and Brandon Ross is far and away over that.
Yeah, his big trouble in the NFL was not being able to find the holes in a line, and it seems like Brandon Ross was able to find those holes this game, so this does not bode well for Trent Richardson. Now, I feel like fantasy owners can still feel safe because it does look like what they're going to do is when they get within the 5, they're just going to run it with Richardson until he ends up in the end zone. So I wouldn't be surprised. Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if he continues to score touchdowns, but in terms of yards and carries, neither of those are looking very great for the rest of the season right now.
At this rate, he's going to get like 4 next week.
Yeah.
8 is just so low. It scares me if I'm an owner. And as we flip over to a more successful offense, the San Antonio offense actually had a good game. Or should I say Kenneth Farrow had a very good game. Because the San Antonio pass offense was just about non-existent with Logan Woodside. 11 of 25 for 106 yards. Really not good at all. He didn't have any touchdowns, but hey, he didn't turn the ball over like Perez. But Kenneth Farrow put on a show, rushing for, I believe, a league most in a game, 142 yards, which was more than his quarterback had thrown for the entire game. Which is even more impressive because you never see that kind of number.
No.
Outstanding game for Kenneth. And another reason as to why San Antonio won this game would be Birmingham's second half collapse. I mentioned it before in the recap. Birmingham went into the half tied at 3, but their offense was a train wreck from there on. 4 turnovers in a game is unacceptable, let alone 1 half. This just further proves my thought that the Iron are run by their defense, and this team only wins when their defense is able to hold other teams to a reasonable sum. This didn't work this week, but still made a terrible offensive day appear decent with a 1-point loss.
Yeah, I don't want to bash Birmingham as a bad team because they aren't. They aren't at all. As a matter of fact, we do still think they're one of the better teams in the league, but they just have to figure out this offense. If they can figure it out, they're going to be lethal because it seems like if they could score 20 points a game, they'd win because this defense is terrifying. That is my big key to the game, and that is the Iron defense. Now, unfortunately, they do rely very heavily on forcing turnovers, and that's how they've pretty much won their last 3 games. And also, their run defense has been a little weak. It's not nearly as stout as their pass defense. And if they can get their run defense on par with the pass defense, it might not matter if their offense can't score. Because if they don't give up that 142 yards to Kenneth Farrow, they win this game. The defense was terrific. This passing game, or their pass defense, like I said, excellent. My player to pass on this week was Mikhail McKay, and it turns out I was right because Jamar Summers held him to only 19 yards, and the Commanders' normally excellent receiving crew was led by Greg Ward Jr. with only 2 catches for 24 yards. Next week's game against the Apollos will be their toughest test this secondary has had to face with Jalen Marshall and Charles Johnson. They held the Commanders to only 3.82 yards per play, which is also excellent from the defense. So if the defense can either get turnovers and give their offense good field position to kick field goals, or their offense can figure it out, these guys are easily going to jump back up in the power rankings because this defense is too good to sleep on the iron.
Has to be. I wonder what else they have there in the iron facility because Luis Perez, he's getting it done, but I don't think he's the reason that they're winning these games at all.
No.
And I wouldn't necessarily judge them if they maybe tried to look for a change, maybe every 1 or 2 series like the Commanders have done with Marquise Williams.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if they did, particularly, maybe not this next game. It's a big game against the best team in the league, so I wouldn't be surprised if Perez is still starting. But
Yeah,
if they drop this next game and Perez once again does not have a great outing, definitely look for a quarterback change or, like you said, maybe throwing in a different quarterback every couple drives to mix things up. Now, to wrap up this game, we'll jump into our game MVPs. It's Kenneth Farrow. His team faced the best pass defense in the league. He was going to have to step up, and he did in the biggest way possible. He didn't have any touchdowns, but he put his team in a position to score drive after drive, so it has to be Farrow.
Yeah, there's no doubt in my mind that Farrow was the game MVP. No one else even made close to an impact as his production. If you look at the game for San Antonio, I don't even think anyone had over 50 yards, let alone 142, except for Logan Woodside, and he didn't really have that impressive of a game either.
Yeah,
it just has to be Farrow.
When your leading receiver has 24 yards and your running back has 142 yards, you can't even glance at the wide receiver core. You have to look at Kenneth Farrow. All right, so for the last game of the weekend, another very exciting game like the Memphis and Fleet one, and that was the Legends against the Hot Shots. Legends were in Arizona, but they were still able to pull out their very first win of the season, winning 14-11. The game's very first drive ended in the loss of their starting quarterback, so in typical Legends fashion, of course they won the game where their first drive is not good and they lose their starting quarterback. On the very first drive, just a few plays after Matt Sims did make an excellent 33-yard throw to Malachi Jones. He was sacked, fumbled the ball, which was covered by Arizona, and was hurt. He hurt his, I believe, right pinky finger during that sack.
I think he came into that game hurt, though, because if you remember, he was bleeding a lot in Week 3, and I think it was that finger.
Yeah, I believe so, too. I think it might have reopened a cut from last week, and he just was not able to return to the game. The Atlanta defense held strong, and we got to see what we here at AAF Analyzed and all of Atlanta had been waiting for, the true test of Mr. Aaron Murray. He got them all the way down to the Arizona 1-yard line, only to have Lawrence Pittman stuffed on 4th down, and they ended up turning the ball over, but Aaron Murray looked really good this first drive. The Hotshots put together a solid drive. It still ended with a punt. The Legends then responded with a drive and punt of their own, but then the Legends caught a break, and on one of the most ill-advised plays of the season, Rashad Ross ended up running backwards 7 yards and was tackled in his end zone for the first safety in AAF history. This looked really bad.
That was terrible.
Yeah, this looked really bad for what is one of the best receivers in the league. He would have been able to get at least 2 yards on his little carry that he had there, and he ended up running into the end zone and getting caught from behind by Legend safety Ed Reynolds Jr. It was not a good look for the Arizona offense, and you could kind of see they might have been in trouble from this point on during the game.
It kind of looked like a Madden play, honestly.
Yeah.
You don't see that kind of a thing in real life because it doesn't make any sense.
No.
These defensive players are just way too talented for you to try and wrap all the way around the field and try and beat them on the other side. I'm sure Rashad Ross knows this now, but just a really boneheaded decision.
Yeah. The Legends got the ball back and were once again led down the field by Aaron Murray, and then in classic Atlanta fashion, attempted one of the worst fake field goals I have ever seen, and came away with another red zone appearance with 0 points. It was really bad. There was a flip to Younghoe Koo. I don't know if he was going to try to run it or pass it, but there was nobody open and no running lanes, and he was literally immediately tackled. It was not a good play call at all. That made them 1 for 12 on touchdowns in the red zone this season, which, you can pretty much attribute to why they were 0-3 going into this game. Luckily for them, though, their defense was playing really well, and the Hotshots offense once again looked stagnant. The Legends got the ball back, and on the shoulders of Aaron Murray's legs and arms, marched down the field and ended up getting the ball into the end zone with a 9-yard run by Denard Robinson. It was a great run. We saw the speed that Robinson brings to the table, and that made them 2 for 13 on touchdowns in the red zone this season.
Woo!
The Legends were unable to convert the 2-point conversion, probably because they literally never had to do them while they played, and they found themselves up 8-0. The Hotshots were able to respond with a nice drive of their own and kicked a field goal to make it 8-3 at halftime. The Legends were dominating this first half. They had over 20 minutes of possession compared to only 9 minutes for the Hotshots. It was some excellent football by the Legends.
Wow.
The second half started with the Legends defense still playing solid ball and the Hotshots offense stalling. Legends were able to move the ball down the field and were helped out by a roughing the punter penalty, but had to punt. Still no sign of the Hotshots offense here in the game, and the Legends, with some help from a run game we said they had needed to find, drove down the field, and Younghoe Koo went 7 for 7 on the season after making a 27-yard field goal to put the Legends up 11-3 with 13 minutes left in the fourth. The Hotshots offense finally found itself a few possessions later after another possession that ended in a 40-yard missed field goal and made this game a great one with a beautiful 20-yard touchdown pass to Rashad Ross where he kind of redeemed himself for that bad safety and a complete 2-point conversion to tie it up at 11 with 5 minutes and 20 seconds left in the fourth. Atlanta responded, though, with an absolutely perfect drive that shows what they're capable of this season. It went 10 plays, 60 yards, and took the clock all the way down to 1 minute and 7 seconds, where Younghoe Koo was able to go 8 for 8 on the season and made the would-be game-winning field goal. Arizona had a final chance but was foiled on 4th and 7 when Atlanta was able to bat the final pass attempt out of bounds and find their very first win of the season. So the big story of this game, it's Aaron Murray. The team looked completely different under him. I'm not going to say anything about him now because he's literally in every other story for the Legends from this game. So you're going to hear about him pretty much every minute for the next 7 to 10 minutes here.
Yeah, well, the long-awaited start for the Georgia product finally came, and Atlanta couldn't be happier because, as we have been saying since after week 1, they need to give this guy a chance because in that one drive against the Apollos, he was killing it out there and they didn't give him a shot. And yes, he did in fact look like a better quarterback than Matt Sims in every single way possible. Murray threw for 250 yards on 60% completion and even led the team in rushing, so maybe he's the running back they've been waiting for the entire time. This guy's a beast. It took them long enough to find him, and who knows why they didn't play him. And I'm sure Matt Sims is okay, but there's no point in throwing in Matt Sims when Aaron Murray is playing this fantastic.
Yeah, I'm really hoping this performance wasn't a fluke. He was one of the quarterbacks I was most excited about at the beginning of the season, and the reason why I thought the Legends were going to have a shot at the championship, so I really hope this play continues here. So now another big story is the Legends' new offensive coordinator. Ken Zampese was hired after the departure of Rich Bartell. Zampese coached alongside a Fleet head coach Mike Martz for the Rams' Greatest Show on Turf. He was the quarterback coach for the Browns in 2018 until he was not retained when Hugh Jackson was fired this year. In his first game, he put together a very impressive game. While they scored only 14 points, the Legends looked competent and like a balanced offense for the very first time. They held the ball for a staggering 37-49 compared to 22-11 for the Hotshots. They found a running game that just hadn't existed, though the carries were so spread out, I wouldn't jump on any Legends running back quite yet in fantasy. The combination of Murray and a trio of running backs, Brandon Radcliffe, Denard Robinson, and Taron Folston, made up most of the Legends' 177 rushing yards, and all averaged over 4 yards a carry. The past 3 games, the Legends combined had only rushed for 205 yards, so they literally almost outrushed themselves from the last 3 games combined this game.
Yeah, Ken Zampese was the guy that they've been waiting for this entire time. There were a lot of, other than that one trick field goal play, which I am going to peg on the special teams coach. Their offense was really good at calling plays. That last drive that they needed to do something so that they could win the game, 10 plays, 60 yards, and what was it, about 2 minutes?
Yeah.
It's just perfect play calling led them to that position, and without Zampeace, I don't know if they would have won this game, because Arizona is really good at making these comeback wins, as we saw week 2.
Yeah, there's really nothing to complain about with that offensive play calling there. They had, 400? How many yards? It was over 400 yards of offense this game.
442.
Yeah, it was something ridiculous. Their offense looked excellent this game.
454.
Yeah, against a Hotshots defense who has been pretty solid. But not only did the Atlanta offense improve, so did that defense. After giving up more than 20 points per game in the past 3, the D came to play and held an excellent Arizona offense in check for most of the game. Besides the consistent running of Jarrell Presley and some big catches by one of the top receivers in the league, Rashad Ross, the Hotshots had nothing on offense. And the Legends didn't even have to force any turnovers to look really dominant. If the offense had been able to finish a few more drives, this could have been a dominant win by a previously 0-3 Legends team.
Yeah.
A big key for Arizona here is their struggles on third down continue. We've harped on it a couple of times in past episodes, but they went 4 for 11 this game and are a mere 12 for 45 on third downs this season, a mere 27%. I honestly don't know what they have to do to fix that number. It's probably coming down to play calling. They just aren't running the right plays to get past the sticks on third down. So they have to get that number up if they want to continue to be one of the better teams in the league. Speaking on the other side of the ball for the Hotshots, where was the Hotshots defense? This defense was only giving up 181 passing yards per game and got shredded by a backup quarterback, though the fact that he was a backup can be argued. They were near the bottom.
He should have been the starter whole time.
Yeah, I know. They were near the bottom of the league, and boy, did that show in rushing. This defense is going to need to get their feet back under them just as much as the offense to stop this 0-2 stretch from becoming anything worse.
Yep, the Hotshots did it again. They underestimated a seemingly lesser opponent, but this time they just never got the ball back to come back from it. They gave up 454 yards to a team that had never produced within 100 yards of that on offense. Obviously, they had a really good offensive game plan this time, but that's still absolutely unacceptable. The defense actually needs to come on the road trip the next time that they play their game.
Yeah, I would like to give one positive shout out to the Arizona team, though, and that's that they still have an excellent run game with Jarrell Presley. He looked great this game, running for 110 yards and averaging a whopping 7.9 yards per carry. On the season, he is averaging 4.9 yards per carry. It looked like the Hotshots would be splitting the carries between Presley and Cook, but Presley ended this game with 14 carries compared to Cook's 3. This could be because they were playing from behind a lot of the time, but still, it looks like Presley's beginning to dominate this backfield.
Yeah, I was thinking earlier in the year that Presley was getting phased out of the offense, but he's making a resurgence, and I'm pretty happy for the guy.
Yeah, he's looking great. Now, onto the player who looked the best, though, this game, and that's my game MVP, Aaron Murray. This one's a no-brainer. He accounted for 308 of the Legends' 454 yards. He went 20 for 33 for 254 passing yards and led the Legends in rushing with 54 yards, making great runs down the field, escaping a collapsing pocket. He was poised and looks only to get better.
Yeah, he kind of looked like Josh Woodrum out there.
Mm-hmm.
Even though he didn't score a touchdown, he finally brought life to a dead Legends offense, and it's just something that they've been waiting for. Josh Woodrum doesn't score a touchdown every game, but he makes enough of an impact that the Stallions' offense is deadly, and that's almost exactly what Aaron Murray did this game, finally giving them that much-needed win, and maybe they'll be able to come back from this and make a run at the top of the East as we approach the end of the season.
Yeah, so that wraps up in a very exciting week of football with plenty of upsets. I would not be surprised if next week is just as exciting because we're going to have some good matchups that we will be previewing, of course, starting Friday with our Week 5 preview episode. But before we close, let's get into where we were right, where we were wrong, and our post-Week 4 power rankings. So where were we right? I did get the Express win right, and I was very happy about that. I was correct on passing on Mikhail McKay. Jamar Summers did an excellent job of shutting him down. McKay nearly had a touchdown catch, but Jamar Summers was able to get in there and break it up on a throw from Logan Woodside. And, of course, starting Rashad Ross, it feels like a no-brainer almost every week this week. He's consistently the Arizona Hotshots' leading receiver and has 5 touchdowns on the year.
Yeah, this is probably one of the worst weeks for me in this segment. However, I did get a lot of things right still. Trey Williams is a really good buy-low running back. He's the guy on the Commanders that got a touchdown. Even though Kenneth Farrow got 30 carries, he still had a touchdown and 20 yards. And over time, they're probably going to try and give Trey Williams some more carries because he's been producing for that offense. So I was definitely right on calling him a buy-low running back, so you can buy him low still and not put too much money against your cap if you're playing a league like that, or pick him up in waivers right now. And the Orlando-Salt Lake game would be decided by a big play producer, just as I had predicted, which Orlando is and cannot be considered otherwise. So I had that one also correct.
And where we were wrong, my power player, Jaquan Gardner, was absolutely atrocious. I apologize for anyone who had a game riding on him or bought him in a league like that. I did not see that coming at all. I tried to hype him up. I did. I thought maybe he would prove me wrong, and he did not help me out this week at all. Yeah. He might even be being phased out of that Fleet offense, though I do see him still getting some carries, but that was bad. So I apologize.
Terrell Watson's turning into the featured guy for San Diego. Where I was wrong, the mighty predictor fell down this week, but don't worry, he will get back up, and I will certainly have a good week next week. Already feeling good. And the snow apparently doesn't affect passing numbers in the Orlando and Salt Lake game, as both quarterbacks put on a show through the very messy weather in Salt Lake.
And now on to what is probably going to be the most controversial and iffy part of this episode, and that would be our post-Week 4 power rankings. These were tough, not going to lie. It was a mess this week with tons of upsets and teams looking very much improved or very much worse. But the one team that has been constant and makes the power rankings easy has been the Apollos. They are, of course, at number 1. You could put a space between them and all the rest of these teams. They have the best offense. They have one of the best defenses. They have great balance, great play calling. Steve Spurrier is a great coach. So they are our number 1.
Yep.
Number 2. This is where things start to get interesting.
Yeah, number 2, we have Salt Lake. Because Salt Lake is, yes, 1-3, and that does surprise you. But the Stallions have kept it close. Their 2 losses, other than this most recent one, were because Josh Woodrum wasn't there. When Josh Woodrum came back, they got a win. And with Woodrum again, they played a really close game with the Apollos. And any team that can play close with the Apollos is deserving of a top 3 spot in our league. We just so happened to give them number 2.
Yeah, they've just had some really unlucky breaks. Having to play the best team in the league this week was one of those. If they'd played any other team in the league, I could easily see them sitting at 2-2 right now. And of course, that Josh Woodrum injury hurt them as well. I see this team as one of the teams with the biggest upside going into the rest of the season here. At number 3, we have the Iron. Of course, they did lose this week, but that defense is too good to count them out of the top 3 in our opinion. If they can figure out this offense, they're going to be one of the best teams in the league by far, so we have them sitting at 3 right now.
Yep. Number 4, we have the Arizona Hotshots. They didn't really have their best game of the season going up against the Legends, but they still have a very formidable offense with John Wolford and Rashad Ross and Jarrell Presley. So we had to keep them up high because we think that they're capable of exploding at any time once they figure out the reason why they play such close games with teams that don't have a great record.
Yeah, we'll have to see what happens to them. If they drop another game, I am not opposed to putting them pretty far down in the power rankings here because something's wrong and they aren't fixing it. But if they win this game next week and get their feet back under them both on offense and defense, they should sit pretty at 4. Now, tied for 5th, this is also pretty controversial. We have the Legends tied for 5th with the Commanders. The Legends look like a totally different team than those first 3 weeks. Their defense was dominant. Aaron Murray led a very dominant offense, both with passing and rushing this week. So we have them tied at 5th, and I would not be surprised if they start to jump up even further. We also have the Commanders tied at 5th because they came out of this week with a win. That's pretty much why we have them there. Their offense, passing game-wise, wasn't great, but of course they are playing the best passing defense in the league. Kenneth Farrow is pretty much carrying them to this tied for 5th spot in the power rankings.
Yep, after them we have the Fleet at number 7. We had them really high last week because they have a lot of good upside, but the only thing is with Philip Nelson out, neither of us really believe in Alex Ross that much to put him above some of these other teams that are catching fire, so we have to put him fairly low at number 7, which is unfortunate because we both like the Fleet and think that they have a lot of good players on their team.
Mm-hmm.
And finally, rounding it out, number 8, we have the Express. It's because they're lucky. They shouldn't have won that game, simply put.
It's weird having a team that just got their first win at the bottom, particularly after some of these teams lost. But now they could totally prove us wrong next week and go on to have a dominant offensive performance. But they were saved by the leg of Austin McGinnis and some really good turnovers, forcing sack fumbles, which you aren't always going to get. Yeah. So right now we have them sitting at 8, but like I said, feel free to voice your opinion on Twitter about maybe how wrong we are or whatever. But this week was really hard. But I do like that it's getting more difficult to rank these teams because that means every team can really contend, except for the Apollos sitting on top right now. But who knows? Something can go wrong for them too. None of these teams are immune to injury and things like that. So I think the AAF is shaping up to have a really exciting season. No one knows what's going to happen next, and I think that's awesome for the league. Yeah. So that is all for this episode of recaps. We ran through all the games. We hope you enjoyed. Don't forget, we're going to have our Week 5 preview releasing on Friday. And don't forget to follow us on Twitter for exciting announcements at AAF Analyzed. Thank you once again for watching, and peace out and play football.
Thank you for listening to the AAF Analyzed podcast. Follow the show on Twitter at AAF Analyzed and feel free to contact the show to have your questions featured on a future episode. And don't forget to check out the show on all other platforms such as iTunes, SoundCloud, and YouTube.